Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning to talk a little bit about mobile money. I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the bank in your pocket. I assume everyone in this room has a mobile phone. Anybody here not have a mobile phone? Awesome. You are incredibly empowered from this moment on. One of the things that has happened and was really fascinating over the last couple of years is this explosion around what we broadly refer to as payment innovations. We talk about mobile money, we talk about digital cash, we talk about financial inclusion, and I want to try and demystify a little bit of that today and talk about the impact of embracing these technologies. Now, I don't know how many folks are familiar with NetHope. NetHope is a global organization of a lot of nonprofits in the technology industry. But the thing that I want to pull out about NetHope is that the thing that we really, really care about is the impact that technology can have on the challenges that we're facing today. And so while I certainly came out of the technology industry, I am a technophile by every definition of the word, the fact that technology is cool actually doesn't matter. And we've heard a lot of these conversations over the last couple of days about that sometimes the simplest technologies applied in innovative ways are really the thing that changes the game. So I want to talk today a little bit about how that actually happens in the world of financial inclusion. 2.5 billion people in the world do not have access to financial services at all. Now you may say, well, gosh, that sounds bad, but does it matter? So think about it for a second, what that being part of the financial system allows you to do. It allows you to send and receive money. And not necessarily digitally, just somewhere to put it. How many folks remember standing at the bank on Friday afternoon to withdraw cash so you had cash over the weekend? I grew up here in Nashville, and I remember my dad worked down on 4th. I remember standing at the bank down there on Friday afternoon so that we would have money for the weekend. And if we spent all the money at the movies buying popcorn, we didn't get to go roller skating because, we hadn't gone to the bank. I remember going to college and getting my first ATM card. That was like the coolest thing ever, right? But being part of that system means something. It allows you to have power over and access to the resources that you have. If you're poor, one of the big challenges that you have is you have nowhere to put your savings. Where do you put your money? You've got a lot of money, right, wrapped up in your agricultural goods. You've had a great crop, and it's going to sit there until you can sell it. And then when you've got cash, where are you going to put it? If you're not part of the financial system, it doesn't allow you to weather the shocks that happen to all of us, right? Somebody gets sick, where are you going to get the money? Now you got to go sell grain. What if it's not good today? What if the jewelry that you bought in order to safeguard your savings can't be sold today? Then what do? How do you pay the doctor? So being part of the financial system is really, really important for those folks out there that have some means by which to earn, and do earn, but actually have nothing to do with that money. So if you think about the fact that the poor rely on the informal economy and this back and forth, the bartering, the putting money here and the putting money there, and when something happens, relying on remittances or borrowing money from friends and family, you realize that that's a real challenge in overcoming some of the financial obstacles that the poor are facing. So 2.5 billion people don't have access to financial services. The remarkable thing about that is 1.9 billion of them have a mobile phone. So it's not a question of not necessarily having buying power. It's a question of not having access to the services themselves. And if you think about that, it makes sense, right? If you remember standing in the bank on Friday afternoon, or even these days going to the ATM machine, those are physical locations. It costs a lot of money to put a physical financial services infrastructure in place. And in lots and lots of places, there just aren't banks. And the commercial banking system has not figured out a way to put banks in all sorts of different places all over the world so that folks can have access to the services that are available to them. So what do? Well, let's look at the mobile phone. And the fact that we all have mobile phones and that so many folks have mobile phones has opened up a wide range of possibilities for us around the use of mobile money. Now, there's a lot of things involved in the broader question of financial inclusions: savings, insurance, credit, all of these types of things. But mobile money is one of the most promising ways to get there. What's also interesting is mobile penetration is significantly higher than banking penetration. I want you to look at Malawi. right? So while there's not a lot of ongoing subscriptions in Malawi, 99% of the country is covered by cell phone coverage. So coverage is there, but less than 5% of the country has access to banking. So if you can't get to the bank, how are you going to get to be part of the financial services world? Well, we're going to do it through mobile money. And we've seen that, as we all know, necessity is the mother of invention. Mobile money has become incredibly popular. And in fact, 75% of the countries that have the highest penetration are in Africa. 2/3 of Kenyans have an M-Pesa account that they actively use. So we know it can be done. We know it can work. The question is to what end? What we do know about the broader question of financial inclusion is that mobile money and the ability to move cash back and forth, whether that's digital payments or cash itself, is the first step on a long path to broader financial inclusion. And it's one of the most promising, because the fact that you have money in your hand, whether that's digital money or an M-Pesa account or whatever it may be, that is the first step on a long road to this broader question of financial inclusion. And so as we think about sort of how do we go out and change the game, how do we go out and make a difference, I want you to think about, and I would encourage you to think about, how do we start to include mobile money and include these types of services in the programs that we're doing and taking advantage of them so that we can help people take that first step into being part of the broader financial system. So I want to argue there's 3 reasons that we should think about that: security, humanitarian impact, and dignity. And I was thrilled. I was unable to be here on Thursday. I live in Seattle. Our teachers have been on strike for 2 weeks for any number of frankly, very good reasons. And the first day of school was Thursday, so I ended up having to delay my trip a day so that I could send my first grader to her first day of first grade. When I told her that I wasn't going to be there, you can imagine the meltdown that happened. And my mother assured me that was a lifetime of therapy I would be paying for if I missed her first grade day, so I missed the first day. But I was thrilled watching the tweets to see the conversations that were happening around dignity, because I think that's a really important part of this element. And if we think about the work that we do, and especially the work that you do in the faith community, that's a really critical part of the work that we do broadly in the humanitarian space. But first I want to talk about security, because security is a huge issue, as we all know, for the folks that work in the field and for the recipients and the partners that we work with all around the world. And mobile money has a really important role to play in this. The first thing I want to point out is mobile money really improves transparency. I can track where mobile money goes. I know that it goes from this point to that point. You can see how money flows through a system. You can see who touches it. You can control security and access to those funds. That's really important for reducing corruption. Because if less folks have their hands on the actual money, there's less money to be taken away. And that's really, really important, because we know that despite the best efforts of all of the humanitarian community, despite the best efforts of some governments, of most governments, let's hope, corruption still happens. And so if we can improve transparency and we can see what happens to the money, we can actually put more of the precious resources that we have against the problems that we're trying to solve. It also lowers cost. Now, there is certainly, to some extent, if you're building your own system, a higher startup cost when you're talking about digital financial services. There's no doubt about that. It takes time to put the right services in place. But increasingly, if you look at M-Pesa, for example, and other systems like that are spreading around the world, those systems exist. And now it's simply a question of going out and figuring out which one is best for your given purpose. And one of the most important things is mobile money protects recipients. How many folks have gone out into the field with a lot of money in their suitcase? Right, that's a terrifying thought, right? I mean, it's last year during the Ebola crisis, I mean, we were sending lots and lots of folks to go build communications networks across Liberia and Sierra Leone. And they would literally show up in country with $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 in cash to go pay VSAT installers and drivers and everybody else in the world. And if that money had somehow or another disappeared, what were we going to do about it? Nothing. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard the stories or had the experience. Even if you go to the Western Union office to pick up the cash transfer, How likely are you to get mugged right after you walk out the door? Happens all the time. But as someone said yesterday about, when you sit in your car, no one knows what FM radio station you're listening to. If money's coming to your mobile phone, that's between you and your phone and the sender. And so there's a huge level of security that we can provide to the recipients and to the people that we work with, whether it's our own staff, whether it's our colleagues, or whether it's the folks that are participating in the programs that we're running abroad. We can provide a greater level of security for that. And so for those 4 reasons alone, you ought to be thinking about mobile money. And we ought to be thinking about mobile money across the humanitarian space as we think about how we can leverage these tools in order to make the most of the investments, the precious resources that we have. The second thing I want to talk about is humanitarian impact. And how does mobile money actually help us from a humanitarian perspective? Well, there's one thing that we all know, that there's never enough, right? There's a little bit of aid, and there's a lot of problems. And that problem's not going away, despite all the progress that we've made over the last 40, 50, 60 years. Despite the progress that we've made against the Millennium Development Goals, there is still a tremendous amount of work to be done. And there is no sign that that's changing. We still every day, there's a new issue for us to do with, there's a new twist, there's a new challenge. But one of the things that's really, really interesting about technology, and everybody's heard this for 20 years now, is that technology allows you to do things better, faster, cheaper. Right? Everybody has ever heard that, right? Like, let's go do it. We're going to do it better, faster, cheaper. We're gonna make it work with technology, and it's gonna be awesome. Well, to some extent that is true. It's not always true, but most of the time it's true. And so how do we do that and apply that so that little piece of resource that we have, those precious resources that we have, how do we extend that out to solve the problems that we have? Well, as I said earlier, one of the things that we kind of hold near and dear at NetHope is that technology within and of itself isn't awesome. Technology is ones and zeros. It's wires. It's data running down a wire. It's data running down a cable. But the thing that's incredible about technology, this is one of my all-time favorite quotes, is what it allows us to do. And so if we think about the little piece of aid and the big bucket of global challenges, technology allows us to take the good intentions of the humanitarian community and extend that almost limitlessly. If you've never read any of Kentaro's work, Revi had to leave this morning, but Revi and I used to work with Kent at Microsoft. He's also the guy that said technology has no relevance whatsoever in development, so I want to make sure that I'm not overstating Kent's love of technology. But, he's written a few books that we have argued over a lot. But his argument is that technology within and of itself doesn't matter, but the ability to extend what you intended to do is really, really important. And if we look at the impact that mobile money has had, the early efforts are really encouraging. You can read the slide and see some of these examples. And I'd point out a couple more. CRS started using vouchers in Haiti for their training. And they reduced the cost of each voucher that they were providing for some of the training work that they were doing by $4.50 a voucher. That's a lot of money. They were able to reduce the number of staff that were doing that in Haiti on the ground from 3 full-time staff to 0. If you think about the fact that the average humanitarian worker every year costs about $250,000 in resources back, in field worker costs about $250,000 a year back to headquarters, that's $750,000 just in staff savings that they get to go apply against some problem elsewhere. That's a lot of money. If you think about the impact that we can have in being able to gain a 25 or 30% increase in the efficacy of our aid, that's a lot of money. And if you think about what happened in Afghanistan, and I'm sure folks have heard this story, it's been around for a while, but when we went to digital payments for government workers in Afghanistan, everybody got a 30% raise because we took corruption out of the system. Everybody thought that, wow, look, we're awesome. All the Afghani public service employees thought, this is fantastic. We should do this more often. We just got this huge raise. Nobody got a raise. We just didn't have people taking money off the top. And so there's lots and lots of ways that we see early progress around the opportunity to use mobile money and to use mobile money effectively. We've also seen it increasingly in disaster response. One of the big challenges that we have, of course, is how do we get resources to the point of the disaster quickly and in a way that makes a lot of sense for the local community. And as I was on a conversation with a donor, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, and he said, Lauren, the problem with all of you humanitarian organizations is, you're like the hammer and the nail. Whatever your hammer looks like that, every nail needs that hammer. He said, so if your big issue is, clean water, everybody needs clean water. If your big issue is everybody needs fair housing, everybody needs a new tent. If everybody needs this, that, and the other, and I said, yeah, okay, but all of those things are necessary. And no one's out arguing that everybody needs an iPad, and we're all arguing that folks need basic services. True. But what if we could provide more flexibility in the way that we provide that aid? And if you look at what happened in the Philippines, they just started, after Typhoon Haiyan, there was the government actually did a tremendous project and started providing cash out to affected communities so that they could, in fact, use the cash that they had to rebuild based on what they felt their family needed in order to get their feet back up, get themselves back up on their feet after the disaster. There's also a huge implication in terms of what that means for local markets. There's been a lot of research around in times of famine. It's not that there's not enough food; it's that people can't buy food. In the huge Somali famines of the 1980s and the 1990s, there was plenty of food around. We just couldn't get it to market, and people couldn't afford to get it to the markets. And once it got to the markets, people couldn't afford to buy it. What if they could afford to buy it? What if we could provide aid that way? What if rather than trying to put rice on trucks and run it out to places where people were located, what if we could simply allow them to access what already exists in their local communities and not upset the balance of local providers? Those are tremendous opportunities that are just beginning to become possible in terms of thinking about the impact that we can have from a humanitarian perspective. Now I want to talk a little bit about the question of dignity. And it's a tough question for folks that are involved in the humanitarian space, right? Because all anybody wants to do is to help solve tough problems. In the run-up to the World Humanitarian Summit next year, that will be in May of next year, one of the pieces of feedback that has been really, really interesting is that recipients of foreign aid, and not government aid, but humanitarian, nonprofit-directed aid, have overwhelmingly told the donor and the humanitarian community that they feel marginalized and ignored. And that it's folks coming from somewhere else telling them what they need. And sure, again, the best of intentions. And we've learned a lot with science, but how do we actually include people and help people be part of the solution as we start to try and address some of these challenges? And that is not easy. That is really not easy. I mean, well, the conversations over the last couple of days around gender, we have a hard time getting, big buckets of folks involved. Half the population. How do we make sure that half the world's population is involved? When we start to really think about the nuances of local communities and what people need and what they would prefer and how they would prefer to be served, how do we actually start to address that? And so dignity becomes a really interesting question. And if you go back to this notion that technology doesn't solve the problem, but it can expand our intent, the reason that that's true is because technology is inherently empowering. Melinda Gates did a phenomenal interview a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about the Gates Foundation's newfound focus on putting a mobile phone in the hands of women around the world. And she was talking about how isolated women often were. But if you could give them a phone and you could give them access to information that they needed to take care of their family, that isolation went away. I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was doing some work with education in the Philippines, and it was an eye-opening moment for me. I was talking to someone in the Ministry of Education, and he said, Lauren, you don't understand. He said, when we have new teachers come into the Philippine education system, we tend to, because they don't have the experience, they tend to be on these outlying islands. He said, so you've just graduated from your teacher preparation course. You don't really know what you're doing quite yet. And what do? We stick you out on an island, and we say, good luck. If we could give those folks an internet connection and connect them with other teachers in a community where they could learn to and have that one-to-one mentoring that is so important in those early years of teaching, wouldn't that be smart? We thought that would be really smart. Good news is now about 98% of the Philippines is covered by mobile coverage, so we're starting to address some of those problems. So the idea that technology is empowering and you can use technology to empower an individual in a community is really important. How many folks remember the first time that they bought something, that mom and dad gave you cash and you got to walk up to that was such an empowering moment. I have an 8-year-old as well, and a couple of weeks ago we were somewhere and she wanted to buy her own frozen yogurt, and I thought, this is ridiculous. Like, Mojo, just let me mom wants to do it. Come on, we're in a hurry. Like, get your sprinkles, whatever. Come on. She said, Mom, don't make me act like a baby. I want to buy my own frozen yogurt. I was like, fine. I was like digging through my bag, seeing if I actually even had any cash to give her. And I find $5. And when she turned around with that sense of accomplishment, right, that smile on her face that she had bought her own frozen yogurt, it was a really heartwarming moment as a mom. Now think about doing that in a world where people feel incredibly marginalized and not listened to. Think about what that delta must feel like. Now, one of the things that's also been interesting about the question of mobile money is people say, yes, we can give people mobile money, we can send cash to people or cash assistance to people, but they misuse it. People don't make great choices. People make really bad choices. And we've looked at that. And it turns out the evidence is overwhelming that people don't make bad choices. Sure, some folks go out and they buy alcohol or they buy cigarettes or whatever the case may be. They don't use their money wisely, but by and large they do. By and large, actually overwhelmingly, they make very good choices about what's best for their family right now. If you look at what's happened in Lebanon with the Syrian refugees, about 70% of Syrian refugees sell the food aid that they get. And they sell it because they want the cash to buy what their family actually needs. And so, all great intentions. We're going to give you a bag of rice, and they're going to take it right down to the street. They're going to sell it, and then they're going to take that cash and use it to buy what they need. So this idea of being able to empower an individual is really, really critical in the larger scheme of how we empower communities to take responsibility and be part of the solution that we're trying to help them with. Now, this is the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya. Has anybody ever been to Dadaab up in northeastern Kenya? Dadaab's been around since the late 80s. It has ranged in population from about 350,000 people today. It's been as high as 600,000 people. On any given day, it is the third or fourth largest metropolitan area in Kenya. Most of these are Somali refugees. They are now on their third generation of folks that live in Dadaab. 80% of them are women and children. It is not a great place to grow up. And on occasion, there have been enormous and not insignificant security concerns with Dadaab, and I am not trying to minimize those in any way, shape, or form. And every now and then, the Kenyan government goes back to UNHCR and says, you gotta get these folks out of here. They're creating real security concerns for our folks in Nairobi and frankly elsewhere across Kenya. What are we gonna do about Dadaab? Now, I don't know about you, but I have no idea where we take 350,000 displaced folks. I don't know where else they would go. And Dadaab right now is a fully functioning city. A couple of years ago, NetHope wired Dadaab and brought internet connectivity up to Dadaab in partnership with the local telco providers. And frankly, all we were trying to do was to reduce the cost of broadband connectivity for the nonprofits that were operating in Dadaab. That work has now extended. It is now a commercially sustainable solution. We are now in the process of running fiber up to Dadaab. And part of that is because individuals that live in Dadaab have now actually started to use the internet connectivity that now covers the entire camp for telemedicine, for education, and increasingly for mobile money and sending money back and forth to their families back in Somalia and elsewhere. And so that's become a really important part in us thinking about how do we actually provide the right standard of living in Dadaab and give people a sense of community there so that they themselves can help us address some of these security issues. And in a really interesting conversation a while ago, there were some folks talking about, what if we stopped giving folks in Dadaab bags of rice And what if we gave them all $50 a month? My guess is that the perception of 350,000 people that now have $50 a month to spend or $10 a month to spend drastically changes whether or not they are welcome in any given country. Think about the Syrian refugees that are now flooding across Europe. Most of them are middle class, most of them are educated, most of them have savings that they cannot access back in Syria. They all have cell phones. But what if those folks could actually, rather than sell the food aid that they're getting in Lebanon, actually be part of the local economy? It doesn't solve the problem, but it provides a level of dignity to the refugees that they need in order to keep going. And it would really, really change the way that the local community thinks about whether or not they're welcome in their countries. I don't know what the right answer is. I really don't know what the right answer is. But if I think about the possibilities of how a tool that can empower an individual to make decisions about what's best for their family, what's best for them in a time of need, and how they improve the community around them, mobile money has a heck of a lot of promise. And it's really something that we ought to be looking at. The problem, of course, is that you and I just can't decide to go do mobile money. We all have to go do mobile money together. So as you're thinking about the work that you're doing, I want to encourage you to help communities in which you're working start down that path of financial inclusion. If mobile money is the entry point, then all of you have the ability to be the spark to change that and to create those opportunities for broader financial inclusion and self-empowerment around the world. So, get started. How do you do that? Learn from past mistakes. There have been lots of efforts. Some of them have been successful, some of them have not. And the only thing I can tell you based on all the work that we've done and what we have learned from is plan some more, then plan again. Get somebody else to look at it, tell you what you did wrong, go back, plan again, and then practice. One of the things that we have found that is most useful is when aid agencies want to go and implement mobile money, they start with their own staff. How do you actually provide per diems or travel support in a mobile scenario to folks that are in the field? And if you can do it with your own staff, that provides a level of familiarity that then allows you to communicate that in the education of the communities in which you're working. Because mobile money can be really scary. And if I have been working in your local community for a while and I say, listen, we're not going to give you rice anymore, but your cell phone is going to get some really neat stuff, that is, if you're not familiar with technology, that's a really scary thought. So plan, work internally, get folks bought in, and over educate folks about what it is that you're trying to do, and it will greatly increase the chances of adoption. Folks familiar with Pathfinder in Africa, the Pathfinder folks, it took them about 18 months, but they have now actually moved all of their payments, with the exception of one or two small programs across Africa, to digital payments. And they're now doing, I think, $24 million a month or something like that in support assistance, all digitally. And they did it largely because they planned for about 18 months before that. So it really has been a sort of a slow process, but one that's been highly successful as they rolled it out. There's a couple of resources I'd point you to. In looking at moving from cash to electronic payments, there is a toolkit, and I'm happy to share these slides so that you don't have to write all this stuff down. There's a toolkit that's out there that literally will walk you through a planning process. It's got checklists and websites and resources and all sorts of things. It's got links to in-country providers. It's got all sorts of details around all of the pieces that you need in order to put a great plan in place. The Office of ODI, which is part of UK Aid, just released a high-level report on humanitarian cash transfers on the 15th of this month. It is a very, very good report. I say that because I was part of it, but I actually had almost nothing to do with it, so I'm not going to claim any credit for it whatsoever. The really fascinating thing about the ODI report, other than giving you a great overview of mobile money, are the footnotes and all the research around what really has worked and what really hasn't, and the connections to these questions of security and intent and dignity and what people are saying and where it's been successful. And then if the NetHope Solutions Center just has a ton of feedback from the member organizations that we work with about what's worked for them and what hasn't. And so if you want some more examples and some case studies, they're all up there. And so with that, I'll simply say thank you. I know it is sometimes hard to think about how we apply technology effectively. I know technology moves very, very quickly, and we work in some very, very difficult situations. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for keeping an open mind about what could potentially be possible. And thank you for letting me come to Nashville today and be part of this great event. Thanks.